So we talked about the fact that life is complicated, but look at what Jesus says. He says this verse, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So I got to ask you, does that characterize your life? Is your life characterized by ease and rest and peace? Is that really part of who you are? Sometimes on Saturday mornings before the kids wake up, I have 5 minutes of ease and peace. Maybe that's you, or maybe, for me, it's actually like after midnight when everybody else has gone to bed, and then I'm all by myself. It's like between midnight and 2, that's my ease and peace moment, and then I sleep in late the next morning, so I get some ease and peace there sometimes. Anyway, so here's the deal. If your life is not characterized by ease, by peace, by a light burden, then you haven't come to Jesus. Because Jesus says, "Come to me and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." If you're feeling burdened, Jesus didn't put that burden on you. If you're feeling weighted down, you haven't come to him. Because he says very clearly, he wants you to have rest for your souls, to have peace. And so I want to help you know from the very beginning of 2012 how to have the rest in your souls, how to have the peace in your souls that you need. And it all boils down to simplifying your life. Now, simplicity means priority. If I'm going to simplify my life, I have to figure out my priorities, and I have to get my priorities straight, and I have to put them in the right order, and I have to live by them. And if I have priorities, that means I need a framework. I need some decision mechanism for figuring out what's most important, and then what's next important, and so on. And I'm here to tell you that in the Bible, we're given that framework. There are 4 key commands in the Bible that Jesus says you need to live by. Today, we're going to look at the first one, but we're actually going to see the first 2. And then towards the end of the series, we're going to look at the next 2. There are 4 core commands in the Bible, and we've taken those 4 core commands and we've put them in our church life, and we call them our core values. They're just simply 4 of them. And like we do every year in January, we're going to talk about those 4 things, one after the other, so that by the time we get to February, you're going to be ready to make a commitment on what we call Commitment Sunday. If this is your first time with us, or if this is your first January with us, or first winter with us, then what we do in our church is the first Sunday of February, Super Bowl Sunday, the Sunday everybody gets hyped up about, we get hyped up about too, because we make it our Commitment Sunday. And I want to make sure you're ready for that. Between now and then, I want you to know what you're committing to if you want to be part of this church for 2012. But more than that, I want you to experience the life that Jesus has designed you to experience. I want you to have that life because his life for you is such a blessing. All you need to do is get the priorities straight. 4 things, 4 messages, 4 core values, the heart of this church. So in this series, we're going to do just a couple things to give you a framework for what we're trying to accomplish. It's written there on your note sheet. We're going to cover the biblical reasons for our core values. So we're going to do a lot of Bible study. Number 2, we're going to explore how that value makes sense in the modern world. And then number 3, we're going to try to see what a commitment to that value looks like. So to get started, we're going to start with our first priority for this year, our first core value, and we're just going to jump right on into it. It's Mark chapter 12, verses 28 through 44. If you're using the Bibles that we passed out today, it's on page 709. Flip there with me. As you're flipping to that page, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of what's happening. Jesus has been teaching, and the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders, have been approaching Jesus and asking him all kinds of crazy questions because they're trying to trick him. So they're asking him questions like, is it right for someone to pay taxes, or other questions? And so we're going to jump into this at the end of that discussion. The last question that Jesus gets asked, and the question that shuts everybody else up. When he answers this question, everybody shuts up. They just don't ask him anything more because that's it. I mean, he's given the best, most important answer, and they know there's nothing else to ask. Here we go. It's Mark chapter 12, beginning in verse 28. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating, all these people debating with Jesus. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Well said, teacher. I just love that. The guy looking at Jesus, he's saying, good job, Jesus. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You're right in saying that God is one and there's no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, You are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions. This is amazing to me. There are at least two ways why this passage continues to amaze me. But before I tell you why it amazes me, let me just give you the quick summary. I mean, Jesus says this, write this down, here's some blanks to fill in. The greatest command is to love the only God with all you are, and then to love others as yourself. The greatest command is to love God, the only God, with all you are, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. Love others as yourself. Jesus is summarizing the entire Old Testament. I mean, this is a religious teacher, and he's coming up to Jesus. He says, what's the most important thing? And Jesus tells him the most important thing, plus then he also gives him the next most important thing, the second one. And so Jesus is giving him these two commands that, according to Jesus, summarize the entire Old Testament. Now, next week, we're going to talk about the second command. Today, we're going to focus on the first command. And then the next 2 weeks after that, we're going to figure out what commands summarize the entire New Testament, so that by the end of January, you're going to have in 4 simple commands understanding of the entire Bible, Old Testament and New. So you got to make sure you come back for that. But this is the thing that amazes me the most about this passage. There are really two things. One is the fact that over this past year, I've done kind of an experiment. Every time I meet with someone, I regularly go out to coffee or something, and I sit down and I'm sitting across the table from someone, I'm getting to know them. And every time I do that, I ask them this question: what's the most important command in the Bible? And almost every single time, I tell you, this whole year, only one person has gotten the answer right. This whole year, only one person has given me the right answer. Every other person says, well, gee, let me think about that. I knew this. I know this one. Love your neighbor. I'm like, well, that's close. You know, it's number 2. Jesus says that's number 2, but it's not number 1. Here's the thing. After we talk about that, I share with them the number 1 command is to put God first in all of your life, to love him above every other thing. And they say, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then we go and we talk a little bit more, and I say, so how are you doing on that one? And they'll say, oh yeah, totally. God is the most important thing in my life. And I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. You didn't even know what his number 1 command was, and now you're telling me he's the most important thing in your life. Now, everybody that I've talked to, almost without exception, except for I have spoken to a couple atheists, and they don't believe that God is the most important thing in their life because they don't believe there's a God. But for everybody else, I get this consistent kind of idea. I don't know what God really wants, but he's the first and most important thing in my life. Now, that makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me, but you know what? We've all been there, and you might be there this morning. And that's okay, because you came here today because you wanted to say, it's time for me to make sure I know what God really does want for my life. If he's going to be number 1 in my heart, then he's got to be number 1 in more than just what I say. So here's the deal. If Jesus is going to summarize the entire Old Testament, we have to understand what this really means, practically speaking. And more than that, we have to realize that it's essential for us. I have to have this as part of my life, or else I'm fooling myself. So here it is. This is the way we phrase it as core value number 1. God comes first. Simply that. Later on in the service today, I'm going to connect it with a metaphor that we call the elements. It's on the back of your bulletin. If you want to cheat or if you get bored, you can read the stuff on the back of your bulletin now. But this is the way we phrase it as a core value. God comes first in my life. And so now let's try to figure out what that means. If you're going to say God comes first, what does it actually mean? Well, our first hint comes right here in this story, okay? Remember what happened. This man says to Jesus, "Good job, Jesus," right? And then immediately after that, check out what he does. He simply paraphrases back to Jesus what Jesus said to him, okay? So the man, it's almost as if he's trying to show the rest of the world around him that he knows this stuff too. And so he's affirming Jesus. Jesus gave a good answer. And so the man paraphrases back to him. And he says, "Jesus, you're right. To love God is the greatest thing." And so he's paraphrasing Jesus. And then you know what Jesus says after that? Did you see? He says, "You're not far from the kingdom. You're not all the way there, but you're not far." Who in the story is all the way there? Jesus. Good. Right. You guys know the answer. Sunday school, the answer is always Jesus. So the one who's in the kingdom already is Jesus. And what does he say? His words are a direct quotation of the Old Testament. This other guy, his words are a paraphrase of Jesus, and he's close. You see what's going on there? This isn't explicitly the point of Mark's writing here, but what's happening is that Jesus quotes the Old Testament directly. This other guy paraphrases Jesus, and he's close. How could he get closer? He could get closer by just simply saying, "Jesus, I believe that too. I have it memorized too," and he says it too. Then he's all the way there if it's in his heart, if he believes it, if it's true. But at the very least, he's paraphrasing Jesus, because here's the thing. If God really is going to be number one in your life, his word has to be your authority. Jot that down. If God comes first, it means his word is my authority. I get a lot of email, an overbearing large amount of email. I have Gmail. How many of you in here have Gmail as your email account? Okay, I'm using 55% of my 7 gigabytes of Gmail. Now, I've had Gmail for about 6 years, and so it's accumulated. I've archived a lot of stuff. But a lot of that is because I get tons of stuff every day, and the reason I'm on Gmail is because it filters most of that stuff out for me. But I still get a ton. And so this year, it's not really a New Year's resolution because I started it in December, but I'm getting ruthless about my email management. And so what I'm doing is I'm deleting things like mad, and I'm unsubscribing to everything I can unsubscribe from. And if I can't unsubscribe from it because it's some list or something that I need to